This video was uploaded all those years ago on January 1st, 2011. It's another of the most watched rewinds on the channel, and I'm not sure why, considering it was such a dismal failure at the box office, and I keep running into people, even Powerpuff Girls fans, that have never gotten around to seeing it. Maybe there just aren't a lot of reviews of this movie on YouTube. I still think it's an underappreciated and somewhat forgotten gem, and it always puts a huge smile on my face when I go back to it. And I can't stop referencing it in other reviews. It's poking fun at the kind of superhero collateral damage Man of Steel will later completely ignore, which is a point I meant to make there, but I think I forgot to include it. And I talk about Bruce's help the town and make it a better place machine in The Dark Knight. I hate that this one got flagged because I love the animation in this movie so much, and I hate to present it without the stills, and because this review used to have a fun teaser with the scene where the girls are exiled to an asteroid set to Ernie's I'd Like to Live on the Moon from Sesame Street. But we have a great backdrop by DJ, our guest artist. If you'd like to watch the original video, it's still available. It hasn't been blocked, but I have it unlisted right now. You can find that link in the description. Whether you never heard this one or you're revisiting it after a whopping 7 years, I hope you enjoy it. The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. You know, the more I do these reviews, the more you folks are finding out about me. One of our viewers left a comment on the last review, and seemed very surprised when I revealed I was going to do the Powerpuff Girls movie. And of course, I'd have to eventually anyway, since it is a superhero film, but for the record, yes, I was actually looking forward to it. I'll get this out of the way now. I'm a pretty big fan of the Powerpuff Girls, and if that shocks you, then you either never watched the show due to the unfortunate reputation it garnished from all the tacky merchandise aimed at preteen girls when it was popular, or its particular brand of humor just doesn't appeal to you. If you fall in the former category, I suggest giving it a shot. Despite all the jewelry and all the frilly pink shirts and backpacks and everything, Powerpuff Girls was never primarily aimed at little girls. It was just easy to package it and sell stuff based on the Powerpuff Girls to little girls. The series itself, and by extension the movie, is first and foremost superhero parody, and is trying to appeal to anyone who likes comics and superheroes, people who like traditional cartoon sight gags, people who think puns are amusing, and yes, people who appreciate cute. Now, I'm not a little girl, but I don't think that means I shouldn't find the Powerpuff Girls themselves charming and adorable. And the reason it works for me is because of Craig McCracken's nonsensical sense of humor. What he puts on screen is unnatural and strange. He throws contradictions together, things that just don't go together at all, and makes everyone in the universe he's created oblivious to this. And that's why, at least to me, it's funny. So I don't enjoy the Powerpuff Girls just because they look and sound cute. I like them because the idea of 3 kindergartners being called up by the mayor, a la the Bat Phone from the Adam West Batman series, to go beat the crap out of bad guys and then run off to be cute kids again, kind of funny. And I explain all of this because the Powerpuff Girls movie is very difficult to look at critically for me. First, parody is just kind of hard to review. Parody pokes fun at and sometimes provides a commentary about the thing it's parodying. The plot, even a good plot, is serving a larger purpose and is therefore primarily the staples holding the joke book together. And so the only criticism you can really make is how successful it is at making fun of what it's making fun of. And that boils down to, is it funny? And whether or not something is funny is very subjective. So I can tell you the gags I think are funny. I can tell you what specifically I think the parody is making fun of, but at the end of the day, whether or not something like this is a good movie becomes mostly a taste issue. Does this movie entertain me? Yes. Will it entertain you? I don't know, because I don't know if it was made for you. The thing that always jazzed me about the Powerpuff Girls was its style. It's hyper, it's energetic, it's bright and flashy. It has this pumped-up techno-electronica soundtrack, and it has a great sense of fun. It's not an animated series, it's a cartoon, which I think is an important distinction to make. It's intentionally silly, and it has cartoonish laws of physics. If you don't think hugely disproportionate heads with huge eyes on small bodies with hands that have no fingers is funny, then this isn't for you. If you don't think monkeys with huge brains are funny, this isn't for you. If you don't think ridiculously long-winded monologues that keep repeating themselves is funny, then this isn't for you. Maybe it just isn't your barrel of monkeys. The best move I think Craig McCracken made was trying to create something that would look good on the big screen. He didn't just make a long episode of the series, though it has sometimes been criticized as feeling too much like a long episode. The movie integrates 3D animation with its usual ultra-stylized, ultra-simplified 2D animation to create a visual depth we'd never seen on the show before. Now the camera moves through the city and the buildings have perspective. Now the Powerpuff house has a specific architecture that isn't constantly changing. In the show, rooms don't always look the same besides the Powerpuff bedroom, and there's no sense of how big the house is. And this also allows for spectacular action scenes, most notably the sequence where the girls play tag, wreaking havoc around the city, and there's a big three-dimensional steel ball that rolls around with the city's reflection in it. The film, as well as the show, relies a lot on physical gags for its comedy, and again, the movie theater is taken into consideration. When the professor creates the Powerpuff Girls and looks down on them for the first time, his head takes up the entire screen, and he just stares out at the audience for a long time, which is really funny, but more so on a large screen. The movie has a great sense of physical comic timing, like the red ball that keeps bouncing in and out of frame during the tag scene, and Buttercup constantly having to fly down and save the same dog over and over during the climactic fight scene with all the monkeys. And if you do like puns, there are some whoppers here, besides the mayor's pickle puns like Dillstroyer, and maybe an overabundance of monkey puns. There's one that always sticks with me, and it's probably Mojo Jojo's best scene in the movie. He's giving his big speech at City Hall, now that he's about to take over the city, and he says, "For too long, apes and monkeys have been under the thumb of man. Well, now it is time to oppose that thumb." And it has a lot to offer for the pop culture enthusiast. The references are sometimes obvious and sometimes subtle, but usually pretty clever. There are a lot with Mojo's monkey army, the Barrel of Monkeys, the Wizard of Oz monkeys, and then there's the part where Mojo names himself King of the Planet of the Apes. And of course, Mojo's iconic King Kong moment. But there are others, like the Halen brothers driving around in their van, and Bubbles shooting her heat vision like an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars. And there are lots of fun, short references to other superhero properties, besides the big themes and tropes it parodies that I'll talk about in a minute, such as the suiting up montage, where the girls and Mojo put on their costumes, and it's all up close and fast edited, which strikes me as a direct nod to the Burton-Schumacher Batman franchise. There are some films that most people will agree are good, well-made movies, even if they don't particularly appeal to them. The original Star Wars, Rocky, Superman, Batman Begins. Powerpuff Girls doesn't fit into that category. So rather than trying to convince anyone who doesn't like it that it's a good movie, I'm instead going to explore what it's trying to achieve, how it tries to accomplish that, and whether or not there is anything to glean from the story itself beyond your standard cookie-cutter superhero origin plot. In my mind, the cartoon show is a parody of superhero cartoons, and the movie is a parody of superhero movies. Both are making fun and borrowing from what came before. 60s Batman, Super Friends, the first Spider-Man cartoon, and stylistically stuff like Speed Racer, and maybe even Hanna-Barbera stuff like Johnny Quest. And of course, before Cartoon Network owned it, Powerpuff Girls was indeed a Hanna-Barbera show. But the movie is tackling the superhero movie formula, and so we get the Powerpuff Girls origin story. I questioned this when I first saw it in the theater when I was one of the few who helped it garnish its whopping $2 million opening weekend. After all, the origin is plainly stated in the first 30 seconds of every episode. Sugar, spice, and everything nice, these were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little girl, but Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient, etc., etc. Why do we need to fill in the blanks? Are there really any blanks that fans will care to have filled in? Doing the origin also seems a little misleading because on the one hand, it's the beginning, which means anyone should be able to jump in and enjoy it without having seen the show before. But there's a lot of little nods to the show thrown in for fans that newcomers wouldn't appreciate and might even wonder why we're spending time on. We see the girls create the windows on their house that we see in every episode. We see Bubbles get her stuffed animal Octi, which is prominently featured in episodes. It feels very much like a film for the fans, but it also feels like it's trying very hard to bring in new fans. Considering how much of a flop it was, it obviously didn't succeed at that. And I know that some fans wished the film had been a big story to add to the mythos of the show rather than go back and tell a story that doesn't feel especially necessary. But again, McCracken isn't just making a Powerpuff movie, he's doing a parody of something specific, the formula of superhero movies. If you're gonna do that, you've got to do the origin. If fans rolled their eyes because of this, I'd imagine that would make McCracken smile, since he's making fun of overdone things in these kinds of films. I think the movie does a great job at stealing every superhero cliche that's been used for this formula it can, while still creating a narrative, albeit a thinly veiled one, that doesn't just feel like a bunch of jokes strung together. It's a well-paced, well-told story, but it certainly ain't new. The professor creates the Powerpuff Girls. He's the father figure, and like Jor-El in Richard Donner's Superman, he gives them morals and rules to follow. And of course they stumble and fall. But because this is a comedy and a parody, this classic idea is taken to an absurd extreme, and it becomes a lesson in overcoming ignorance and gullibility. First, the girls destroy the city with their superpowers in a game of tag, because they're kindergarteners with powers and they just don't know any better. So the professor forbids them to use their powers in public. Why it never occurred to him to make this rule before they destroyed the city when he was clearly worried they might mess up their kindergarten room is anyone's guess. But then, after getting lost walking home without their powers because the professor is in jail, they're attacked by the Gangrene Gang in an alley and saved by Jojo, who has yet to become Mojo Jojo. He says he wants them to use their powers to help him make the world a better place. Thus, the moral dilemma. They're not supposed to use their powers, but they want the world to stop hating them, so they just go along with it. How often are superheroes tempted by a villain who has an idea that sounds good at the time, but turns out to be disastrous? Purity trying to be corrupted by evil, a classic idea that goes all the way back to the Bible with Satan tempting Jesus, Professor X and Magneto, Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, Batman and Ra's al Ghul. But the dark side of each of those pairs has a pretty clear plan they share with the hero, and they just leave that one important little detail out that changes everything. And as is often the case, like with Ra's and Bruce in Batman Begins, he seduces them by acting as a father figure. But here we get a hilariously silly version. Jojo gives the girls no information whatsoever. He just says he needs them to help him build his Help the Town and Make a Better Place machine. Once it's built, he says, the town will be a better place and everyone will understand their specialness. It's the most overt and obvious manipulation ever, but they fall for it because they were just born recently and they don't really know anything. Superheroes will usually learn some lesson or come to some earth-shattering decision due to their origin about how to conduct their lives from now on. That's the opportunity for change in the origin story that sets up the hero's status quo. It's the same here, but the lessons they learn are really funny because they're also kindergarteners. So they're learning lessons little kids have to learn in real life that craftily parallel traditional superhero themes. Superhero lesson number 1. The world fears what it doesn't understand. Child lesson? Don't play in the street. If you have superpowers and you don't play in the street, people won't hate you as much. Superhero lesson number 2. With great power comes great responsibility. Child lesson? Don't get into fights and don't break public property. But if someone starts a fight, it's okay to defend yourself. If you have superpowers and the person who started the fight is trying to take over the city, it's okay to beat the crap out of him. And that particular lesson parents might take issue with. But seeing as I'm not a little kid and this is a cartoon not to be taken seriously, I think it's hilarious. Superhero lesson number 3. Be mindful of those who would take advantage of your skills for their own motives. Child lesson? Don't talk to strangers. Don't talk to strange monkeys with bags on their heads. Don't let strangers take you to volcanoes, or to the Arctic, or to the zoo. Superhero lesson number 4. Listen to your father or trusted mentor. You'll gain the wisdom to understand right from wrong and true from false. Child lesson? There's no such thing as a help the town and make it a better place machine. And superhero lesson number 5. Don't run away from your problems. Child lesson. Never run away from home. So if we're just recycling and parroting these themes, albeit in a clever and fun way, can we dig a little deeper and find something beyond that? Or should we be careful not to look for meaning that isn't there? I mean, sometimes a pickle cart is just a pickle cart. I do think there's some social commentary going on here on 2 different fronts. The professor creates the girls and sends them off to kindergarten with little to no guidance whatsoever before they go there. He doesn't tell them not to talk to strangers or not to play in the streets, and he even almost drives off and leaves them home alone when they're first made. Don't get me wrong, that's a cute scene and it's just showing that he's new and a nervous parent. But still, I wonder if there's a statement being made about parents having children and then expecting the public school system to raise the kids for them. At the same time, there are a lot of genuinely warm and charming moments with the girls and the professor, which I can't help but smile at. He cares for his girls, but he has no idea what he's doing. And perhaps part of the commentary is that he's simply a product of the society he lives in. The girls trust Jojo solely because they seem to have a similar plight. They're all considered freaks by society. So Jojo takes advantage of them. This is a commentary on how children, and frankly some adults, put too much trust in a person they have something in common with. They think they're the same, and having that person means they aren't alone in the world, so they're less likely to question their new friend's actions, and this leads to dangerous, unhealthy relationships. And that brings me to a point about how the role of the protagonist works in this movie. Bubbles, Blossom, and Buttercup aren't really 3 protagonists so much as the protagonist together. They're sisters and they each have minds of their own, but for the purposes of the story, here and in the series, they've always seemed like one whole character to me. Each isn't much without the other 2, even though they have individual interests and personalities. Blossom is the head, Bubbles is the pure and innocent part, and Buttercup is the dark side. This is illustrated really well in the scene on the asteroid, where the three have run away after Mojo has taken over the city and the professor seems not to trust them anymore. Blossom is their brain. She sits and thinks, feeling hopeless, but wanting to do something to solve their situation. They aren't superheroes yet, so it hasn't occurred to her to go beat up all the monkeys and save the day. Buttercup represents their darker, more negative side, so she's given up completely and is putting the blame on Blossom. And Bubbles is the innocent part. She doesn't understand how all this happened, and can't do anything but cry in desperation. So even when Blossom and Buttercup fight, which externally is a sibling rivalry, it plays out more like an internal conflict. These two sides of one unit in conflict until the professor is put in danger and they all, as one unit, make the decision to save him together. They make every decision and every mistake as a group, and they change and grow as one protagonist. That's more of an observation than a criticism, really. Powerpuff Girls has a simple formula, and so this character direction makes it easy to tell stories with that formula. So I'm going to give the Powerpuff Girls movie a 3 out of 4. It certainly isn't for everyone, but I think it succeeds masterfully at what it sets out to do. It's funny, it's witty, and it does a lot to satisfy its fan base without alienating everyone else.